Judge Hooks,
Absolutely.
attorney Lori Roper, and attorney Brian Scanlon.
Right.
And I'm
This
here
is
with
going to be a great segment.
Yes, yes, it is. That's the governor of Talk Radio, Cliff Kelly.
Right.
And we have panelists who are calling in. Lori Roper is the Cook County Attorney Supervisor, Problem Solving Courts, 26th in California. Brian Scanlon is Cook County Assistant Attorney, Public Defender Office. And then we have Captain Art Cody, retired U.S. Navy veteran and Director of Criminal Programs at the Veterans Advocacy Project. And he has an incredible history. This gentleman has an aerospace engineering degree from West Point and graduated magna cum laude from Notre Dame Law School. He actually served overseas. He was an Army helicopter pilot and did so many things in his past. So I'm really impressed with him. But we are going to be talking about...
That's one other, the Captain Art Cody dedication to help veterans in the criminal justice system.
Right,
we'll talk about that, too.
Yes, that's what we're going to be talking about. Yes.
Yeah, right.
So, I wanted to start off with Lori Roper. We can talk, and then Captain Cody as well.
Oh, hello, everyone. Good afternoon.
Hello.
This is going to be an exciting show. I am so excited to have Captain Art Cody on the phone here from the Big Apple, I believe, to tell us about himself and to tell us about the wonderful things that he does for veterans in the New York area. Captain Cody, what can you tell us?
Sure. Well, thank you for that very kind introduction. And I suppose I've been fortunate in that I've spent most of my military career as a reservist.
Yes.
So I got the opportunity to have a civilian career and have a military career. The civilian career really focused on doing mitigation in death penalty cases down south. And a lot of what mitigation is all about is telling a person's story. And very commonly, what we find is that at trial, when the person was actually sentenced, that story was never really told. So all the jury knew about the particular person largely was the crime that they committed. What we do find is that those stories can make, particularly in a death penalty case, can literally make the difference between life and death. Now, because of the amount of time I did the military, it's been roughly 34 years. And I count the 4 years at West Point because it certainly seemed like we were in the military. But due to the amount of time that I spent in Afghanistan, and really fortunate enough to serve worldwide, I got to know our veterans very well in terms of the culture, in terms of the trauma they go through, in terms of the life that they lead. Now, part of what I think I bring to the way I can help veterans is that, as you guys, I think, undoubtedly know, only about 7% or so of the U.S. population are veterans. Mm-hmm. So when we start talking about a veteran's background, we get into a lot of jargon and acronyms and codes that I think the average civilian, and even the average civilian well-meaning defense counsel, is just not going to understand. And that's really important for a couple reasons. One, they are charged to tell this veteran story, but they can't necessarily understand the language. Secondarily, and I think, Cliff, as a Marine, I think you'll concur with this, that being in the military makes, particularly if one has been in combat, has an indelible mark upon the person and is absolutely part of their identity. So a lot of what I'm able to do is to translate the person's military record, certainly by looking at the papers, the person's discharge record, the person's military file, talking to their colleagues, people they serve with, the chain of command, talking with them, and to put together a story of who this veteran is, so that a judge, a jury, a prosecutor, et cetera, can understand who this person is. And I do a lot of work down south working with defense counsel down there to help present the veteran. And sometimes this is veterans that are already on death row, and sometimes it's veterans that have not as of yet gone to trial. But it's important that the jury know and understand who the person is. And secondarily, in maybe not secondarily, but in addition, I do an awful lot of teaching, literally coast to coast, to talk to different bar associations, different judges, defense attorneys, to help them understand how you represent a veteran and what are the things in a veteran's background that you want to point out. In particular, how to get a feel for the trauma that the vet went through and how that may have affected their their actions on the day of the crime. I do a little bit or less than I used to do with respect to Veterans Treatment Court, but I can tell you, I think of Veterans Treatment Court as literally a life changer. And particularly, I think that the T in VTC, the T in Veterans Treatment Court, makes such a difference because in many, many cases, we're talking about veterans who don't need 15 years in prison. What they need is 6 months in an inpatient program to help, as we would say at the Veteran Advocacy Program, to help bring that veteran all the way home.
That sounds great. Now, Brian, why don't you talk to Captain Cody about some of the things that we do at our Veterans Court and see whether or not there's some things that he might do out in the Veterans Court that he's been involved with.
Excellent. Thank you. Yes, I viewed Captain Cody when I took his webinar on how to read what we call the DD-214, which is the discharge paperwork. And then I took that knowledge to our Veterans Treatment Court and explained it to the team, which there's one particular aspect that I thought was so captivating that Captain Cody talked about was that when maybe you have a truck driver or some person who's non-combat trained, but then inevitably gets thrown into combat or experiences some sort of explosion or something, and they have PTSD, and people don't quite understand how could a cook, a delivery driver, a transportation officer have PTSD, and maybe Captain Cody could explain a little about that.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. And I know from my own experience overseas, what you think you're going to be doing when you get to Kandahar or Baghdad may be dramatically different than what you actually do. And a lot of it's based on the needs of the Army or the needs of the Marine Corps or whatever particular branch you're in. And so what we find is we have soldiers and Marines get there, and they may think that they're going to be working in the motor pool. While it's still dangerous because you're in Iraq or Afghanistan, you think you're going to be spending most of the time on what's called the FOB, the forward operating base. But what happens is you may get there, and within hours or days, you may be sent down on convoys fairly consistently. And one of the things I really look for on the DD-214 that you talked about is there's a part of it that talks about what particular awards, badges, and citations the person has. And if the person has a combat action badge, what that tells me is they're not an infantry person because they didn't get a combat infantryman's badge, but they're a non-infantryman who is doing an infantry kind of job, who is being shot at, who is having to return fire, who's being subject to mortar and that kind of thing. And while all our soldiers are trained, and I'm not going to say they don't know one end of the rifle from the other. They certainly do. But there's a different kind of training that a truck driver or a mechanic goes through than what an infantry person goes through. So many times we have our soldiers will come back, and at first glance you might think, wow, the person's a cook. How bad can that have been? It could have been really bad. And again, they're not acutely trained for combat. Certainly, they know the basics, but they're not acutely trained for that. So we see the rate of post-traumatic stress issues is significant. I see an awful lot of cooks. I see an awful lot of truck drivers.
Yeah, and this is Dr. Arnold. But one of the things, I did 2 tours in Iraq, And, in the past, you used to have a forward edge of battle, and there used to be a
right.
strong, it's a very straight and strong line in the ground about where the two, opposing forces would confront one another. And now there is no real edge like that, and they can reach into your base, relatively easily with, rocket-propelled grenades and all kinds of other things. So you are actually constantly at war, no matter where you are on the battlefield these days.
That's a great comment. And what I think about is sometimes I'm asked, why is the rate of post-traumatic stress higher now than, say, it was in World War II, Korea, et cetera? One, I think it was underreported back then. Secondarily, the point you make is there's literally no safe place in Iraq or Afghanistan. There are some places that are safer than others, but it's not as it was, say, in World War II, where people would be in combat, say, 6 weeks and then get rotated back to England, which was actually safe. Not so now. People will go out from the combat outpost, which is the COP, or the combat, the forward operating base, the FOB, and they'll come back, and they may get rocketed at 3 a.m. So there's no safe place. You're literally under constant. It's chronic PTS. It's chronic post-traumatic stress, or it's chronic stress, and from that, our service members commonly develop post-traumatic stress issues.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
So, Captain Cody, what would you say in working in Veterans Treatment Court? What are good incentives to keep a veteran's attention during treatment, during drug treatment, maybe mental health treatment, so we can get that self-directed life back into this soldier's hands or this man or woman's hands?
One of the things I think about is if you think about what the military mottos are, they tend not to be based upon they're not selfish, to say the least. For example, some of the mottos are mission first, or the only easy day was yesterday, or something to that effect. They're very much others first and then yourself. One of the things I really try to drive home with my veterans is that their mission now is to get themselves better, so that they can be, in the military parlance, they can be fully mission capable for their family, for their jobs, for their social circles, to bring them back up to where they used to be. I try to get it away from, hey, we'll work on you because there's a problem with you, much more into this, just as you would treat a wound, just as you would treat a physical wound, your mission right now is to treat this real mental wound that you have, so that you can continue to be of service to others, so that you can continue to do your mission. So I try to put it back, and it's going to depend veteran by veteran, but I try to put it into a context where they are continuing to serve.
Excellent. Do you have maybe a few success stories you could share with us?
Yeah, one of them that comes to mind, actually, and this is a point I want to make, because I read a little bit on the Cook County Veterans Treatment Court, and I believe currently you're only accepting nonviolent felonies?
Yes,
True.
currently
that.
Yeah,
it is true.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I really would encourage. And I know courts take their, they kind of take their time in ramping up and getting a sense of, how far we want to go and how fast we want to go. But our experience in New York is that even if the alleged offense or the offense is a violent felony, and felonies are never good, but some are more violent than others. I try to, when I do speaking when I speak across the country, is talk about a more inclusive admission policy to Veterans Treatment Court. And this is the reason I say that. I'll give you an example. I had a veteran who had recently returned from Afghanistan and was picked up on a weapons charge. In New York State, it's criminal possession of a weapon second, which is a violent felony. And the way it works in New York State, the person was looking at 3.5 years to 15, minimum 3.5. But what we were able to do by talking about that veteran's story, talking about what he was subjected to in Afghanistan, we were able to get the veteran, we were able to get the charge reduced to something that was not a minimum prison term, but rather allowed for probation. And this started out as a violent felony. It was reduced to a criminal possession of weapon third, which was you could be on probation for it. And the client absolutely took advantage of that, went back to school, continued in his VA PTSD treatment, finished school. Now he's getting his master's, and he's going to be a teacher through I believe it's solstice teachers through that program. So life turned out really well for him. But the point I want to make with that, and he's a very good example, but he normally would not have gotten into Veterans Treatment Court, even though his potential for success was very high, and the amount of trauma he had gone through was significant. So I suppose what I'm trying to put across there is a greater admissions policy. Certainly it's a case by case, but I try to encourage judges, DAs, et cetera, not to have a bright line at the violence.
We also have Attorney Lori Roper with us. Consular, how are you doing?
I am great. I am riveted at the conversation, and I was just going to say to the captain that I totally agree in terms of the criteria allowing veterans to come in, because unfortunately we require people who join the military to, in essence, be violent at certain times.
Pardon me for interrupting you. I just want people to know that you are at the Veterans Court here.
Yes, I am.
You're a veteran.
That's right. I'm the supervisor in charge of it here. And the thing is that we're asking these young men and women who had gone to combat or who have gone to the service, who held a weapon, who may have actually had to use that weapon, and now when they come back to civilian life, we expect that none of those things will ever kick in, and we would never have an issue. And I think that we have to realize that these young men and women, or men and women in general, have been trained to do a job. And unfortunately, that job may bring them to us in not a great way. They may have a gun possession charge or something to that nature. And I think that we have to consider the fact that even though they may have something that on paper appears to be violent, or there may have been some violent elements, we have to consider the fact that what we require these men and women to do, we cannot hold that against them when they need us the most.
Okay, and if anyone wants to call in, they can call 773-591-1690, 773-591-1690 if you have any questions out there. But,
we also want to mention, is Judge Hooks with us?
Oh, he is not on the line this time.
Okay, all right, because I wanted to make sure.
Yes.
This is a very important issue.
Yeah.
These folks do a great job in being able to help these people.
Yeah, but one of the things that that Captain Cody was mentioning, and I guess is underlying everything, is that the prison system should not be a mental health treatment system, and this actually bridges that gap by having a veterans treatment court that brings into light that there's a connection here between these two things. And I'm wondering, are there things that you are encountering, and I guess this would be for all the panelists, Attorney Roper, Scanlon, and for Attorney Cody, are there things that you think that we are missing as people who should be supporting veterans before they get to the point of committing a criminal act? Are there treatment gaps? Are there things that we should be paying attention to?
If I can take that, if I could. One thing that sticks out in my mind is the VA, the Veterans Administration, does come under a lot of criticism, but they do fantastic work, and a lot of times they are also life changers, life savers. One of the things that I think is difficult with the VA system, though, is currently if you have what's called bad paper, a bad conduct discharge or dishonorable discharge, on even some degree in other than honorable discharge, you are not allowed access to VA mental health services. So commonly, the veterans who absolutely need this treatment the most are the very ones we don't give it to.
Yes,
So that's something in my mind that needs to be reformed so that we can assist the veterans who truly need it.
Excellent, excellent.
Can
And
we
have a
help in
caller.
doing that? Because that doesn't make sense. I'm glad you said that, and I'm glad that you asked the question, Doc. Because that those are just the people who need it most.
That's right, absolutely. And we have a caller. Claude, you have a question or a comment you want to make?
No, Doc. Actually, it was a comment. Sometimes we forget the history of PTSD. It was actually Audie Murphy, America's most decorated World War II soldier, that came back. He was so traumatized from combat, he slept every night with a 45 under his pillow. He had to take Placidil, which he got addicted to. Sometimes when veterans cling to weapons, it's not because they have criminal intent. It's that holdover from that trauma that they went through.
Yes.
And oftentimes here recently, there's been cases in the last 6 months where there have been veterans that had a drug problem, wound up trying to get treatment on the civilian side. Then when they went to court, because they were already in civilian treatment, the VA turned them down. They got stuck between the two systems.
Wow. That's
unfortunate.
That's right.
Yeah.
Good comment. Great comment, Claude.
Yeah.
Going back to the topic. Captain Cody, what do you think we should be doing? How can we help as veterans to bring more light to this issue, or how can we participate in helping to make sure that our veterans are protected? These are our battle buddies too, that we went through some really traumatic experiences with. So what can we do to help this process?
I think the most direct thing, and even when I'm lecturing more in a legal sense, I remind counsel that one of the most important things we can do is to encourage the veteran to get into treatment. There is absolutely a belief on the part of the veterans that they're Army strong, they don't need the help, I'll be tough, I'll be fine. But again, literally sitting down with that veteran and saying, hey, you have a real no kidding around injury. It's really documented, and there is no doubt you're not weak, okay? But you need to take care of this, and you need to get yourself into treatment. That, I think, normalizing, if you will, destigmatizing mental health is huge. And that's something that lawyers really can do on almost a day-to-day basis. And like the case I talked about, the example, I think one of the best things we did for that veteran was to get that veteran into treatment. It changed his life. And that's not the only one, but that's the one that comes directly to mind. The other thing I would say was to encourage your congresspeople to reform the VA selection process, because I see that time and time again where the client has a bad conduct discharge because of traumatic things that happened to them, led them to go off the rails in the military. Then they got a bad conduct discharge or dishonorable discharge, and again, they came into the military with no criminal record. They were subjected to unbelievable trauma. They could no longer handle it, and so. But now we're not going to help them. That is, to me, it's damnable if that's happening. So, encouraging federally that law to change would be the second thing I would invoke.
Oh,
you've been a great guest, and you're doing some great work. We certainly appreciate you, and of course, the whole situation with the Veterans Court.
Yes.
Attorney Roper, and you folks just continue the job.